think that multidimensional poverty is a pretty new concept, although it has been around for quite a while, and there were different attempts to measure it. I think with the Multidimensional Poverty Index that was jointly done between or with UNDP and OFI, Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, this was the first materialization of the idea of measuring multidimensional poverty. So I think having these workshops on a regular basis, and I think this is perhaps second or third workshop, where you have people that are doing research in this area presenting their results, is very, very good. It's informative. It's a good place for discussion, and without discussion, as we know, there is no progress in any activity, any human activity. And this year it is particularly important because the focus is on the comparison between dynamics that is captured by Multidimensional Poverty Index and income poverty. And so because there are certain doubts among policymakers, governments, decision makers about the whole idea of multidimensional poverty, because it sounds complex. The moment you say multidimensional, it's a complex concept. While income, everyone understands, consumption, everyone understands, and measuring of income poverty has been around for quite a while, and it is easy to measure, it is easy to understand, but the idea is that poverty goes beyond income or consumption. Poverty is something that is very much about children not being able to go to school when they are supposed to go, or people being inadequately fed because they cannot afford food, or people being sick because they cannot afford health care. Or there are governments that have forgotten certain parts or cross-sections of their own populations, and they are not providing electricity or drinking water and so on. So all of these factors, if you like, are put together in multidimensional poverty talks, and we look at all of them, and we define poor people at a much broader basis than looking just if they have enough money for what. That's the question, because international, for example, poverty measure or poverty line is set at $1.25 per day in PPP terms, in this purchasing power parity, international dollars, which is rather too low for many countries. And then governments can, in some developing countries, proudly say, well, look at, we are reducing this. But really this poverty line may be too low to be sufficient, I mean, for people being above it to claim that they are not poor. And by looking into several dimensions measured by available indicators, we can get a better picture of who is poor and how and what is the dynamics of poverty, what people need in order to get out of poverty, and why they are falling below. Now, certainly all of measures are data-driven, so yes, we would measure something and we know what would be ideal indicator for certain aspects of the poverty or anything else, but are data available? That's the big question. Additionally, MPI, Multidimensional Poverty Index, from the beginning was aimed for international comparison. So the important thing is that data that are available should be kind of internationally harmonized or uniform across countries, and so that's another limitation. Because when you think about all investments into statistical capacities of many developing countries over the last 20, 30 years, yes, many countries today have very good household surveys, but these household surveys are usually country-specific. And although they provide many important indicators, these indicators may not be found in another country or in their survey. So we're going with some necessary minimum, which is sufficient essentially for capturing capturing poverty. I should not say multidimensional, but poverty, which we believe is better defined by looking in several different aspects. So there is data limitation, and we know that perhaps with having MPI better understood and more used by policymakers, there will be a way to influence those who are planning surveys and who are conducting surveys to include for the next waves some of the indicators that are missing currently, and that would enormously improve the quality of the MPI and the coverage of the real poverty. Now, on the policy side, MPI is really aimed for policymakers, for policy analysts to understand better why certain parts of the population are poor and why others are not. And so it makes a very good instrument or tool for targeting, because MPI itself, Multidimensional Poverty Index, is one number which consists of two great components. One is head count, how many people are poor, and another is intensity. But it can also be unpacked, and you can get the number of people. You can decompose it and see how many people are poor in the sense of education, in the sense of health, how many of them are deprived essentially in these living standards components. And also it is kind of simple methodology, and as we know, the simplicity is the mother of everything. And so given that it is simple, it's also decomposable geographically or spatially. And so you can see which areas of the country are more deprived in, let's say, electricity. Not that government does not know, but they can see immediately that perhaps lack of services is the reason why people are deprived in living conditions, or living standards. So government can do more providing these services to remote areas or to other underdeveloped areas of the country. Similarly, if there are areas where children that are supposed to be in school are not in school, what is the reason for that? Maybe schools are not available close by, so children have to walk several kilometers or more, or parents cannot afford having children in school because they need them to help them out with whatever activities they do at home, and so on. So I think by looking just the number, one number, MPI, it's possible to compare country over time and across countries spatially. But the real strength of MPI is the possibility of unpacking it and looking at each component. Now, this workshop also brought up several papers that are really based on national sources, not on international. So it is possible for MPI. They confirmed that MPI is a rather flexible measure that can be easily modified and adapted to the country-specific conditions. So, and also can be enriched by additional indicators or better indicators, providing that the country has its own household survey, which is probably richer than these minimalistic international surveys. And so that is one thing that this workshop showed, good examples of adaptations of MPI idea and methodology to country context. The second thing is there are more and more countries that have so-called household panel surveys, so which means that the same people, the same households are followed over time. And so it's possible to study the persistence of multidimensional poverty, how many people are stuck in these so-called poverty traps. And perhaps it is good base for good analysis of poverty by adding another covariates. It is possible perhaps to come up with reasons why some households are trapped in poverty and some are not. Some are moving up, not necessarily out of poverty, but to some sort of milder poverty, if I can say. And also it is possible to study not only mobility, not only persistence, but mobility as well. Again, answering the questions of why some households are moving up. Temporal association, does it mean that once you're poor, you stay there? So all of these things are becoming more and more possible, I would say, by having better data. Not necessarily at the international scale, but within countries, within national context, it's possible. So this workshop also showed that there were examples of good research and good papers, good ideas in that direction. Multidimensional poverty and income poverty, several papers brought up the comparison with the idea to show that either one dominates another or they are equal. But indeed, as we are talking in the sense of multidimensionality, income poverty would be just one possible dimension within this multidimensional framework. So not because they are measuring, like apples and oranges. The multidimensional poverty is going deeper, looking at different aspects of poverty, while income is or consumption is based on how much household can afford to consume based on what they earned or what they got from government as some aid or social support. Now, the ideas are different here. One possible idea is that if we have income available as well as other indicators, include income as one of indicators of living standard. Well, there are correlations within that because there is belief that income is highly correlated with nutrition, and nutrition is highly correlated with health. So, but it's hard to come up with uncorrelated indicators, and some schools of thought say that it's better to have correlated indicators because it shows that all of them are measuring the same thing. So instead of competing with income, I would support if asked, and I think the research has shown that income should be one of the components within the multidimensional framework for measuring poverty. Certainly it should not be one that replaces other living conditions or living standards indicators, but should be added to that complex or set of indicators. Because if we are trying to replace living standards indicators with income, then we are missing these public kind of public assets or public provisions of electricity or water, of perhaps communications and other things that are currently parts of multidimensional poverty index. So what I'm saying is, yes, it's good to compare income poverty and multidimensional poverty, but if income is available in the same data set, my recommendation would be include income as one of the indicators for the living standards. Future of the MPI, well, from the international comparison perspective, I think, and along the lines that simplicity is a kind of must, I would like to see some kind of reduced number of indicators that go into MPI. And especially there is some empirical evidence that having too many indicators on the living standards dimension may influence undoubtedly the outcome of this measurement. So somehow when you look these three dimensions of MPI, then living standards dimension becomes dominant, or the contribution to the poverty, multidimensional poverty, is enhanced on the living standard side. So perhaps by reducing the number of indicators on that side would be a way to go for the future of the international multidimensional poverty measurements, while certainly for the national purpose it can be always modified to the extent that people can always bring in different indicators and for all the dimensions. It is a powerful measure, and it helps countries to compare themselves to each other. It helps policymakers to decide what kind of decisions are most likely to reduce the poverty. And also, I think it's an important tool for advocacy groups, because it allows simple interpretation and can make a good instrument for making points that should be heard by responsible people within the country context, I would say. One message would be that we do have a good measure, and this measure itself brings important information that can be used at different levels. You can use it as one number, so you can then do some temporal comparison of how country fares over time. But it can be also unpacked, and you can look at the different components and see how country is improving in different components. And so it can be also used as a test tool. So if some policies work towards objectives that they are made for, or they are not, so they allow certainly some corrections of policies or some kind of stronger implementation. So the simple message is we have a good tool. It's not perfect. It still can be developed further. But in the way that it's developed methodologically, it's almost perfect. What is needed there are perhaps higher quality data, so that we can really, with the authorities, say that the differences and the changes are due to real achievements, accomplishments, or simply opposite of that on the government side, and not by the quality of indicators, so that the drive is on real policy implementation, and something works or something does not work, and not because of data that are of bad quality or insufficient quality. So I think that one message would be, yes, there is a very good tool, but it requires to be implemented, to be used, to be monitored, to be discussed and used as a test tool. But on the other side, there is a big cry for better quality data for studying poverty. And I think that many developing countries are, progressing in that sense, but they are still far away from having good quality data. But I'm somehow hopeful and optimistic that statistical community is going in the right direction. I think that this workshop added, additional pieces of evidence. The research that has been presented points to that direction. And I think that there were discussions in the policy circles, in academic circles as well. Many economic research has been done within last perhaps 15 or 20 years. And all of them point out that income, or looking just at income distribution and income poverty, is not sufficient.